Welcome to PianoInspires podcast, celebrating pianists, teachers, and innovators as they share their inspiring stories about the transformative power of music.
Hello, I'm Craig Sale, Senior Editor with Piano Magazine and Director of Online Courses for the Francis Clark Center. And it gives me great pleasure today to get a chance to talk with Connor Chee. Connor is a Navajo pianist and composer and is known for combining his classical piano training with his Native American heritage. Connor made his Carnegie Hall debut at the age of 12 after winning a gold medal in the World Piano Competition. He's a graduate of the Eastman School of Music and the University of Cincinnati's College Conservatory of Music. And his solo piano music, beautiful music, is inspired by traditional Navajo chants and songs. He has released 4 studio albums of original pieces and piano transcriptions of Navajo music. The Navajo Piano, which was released in 2014, won Best Instrumental Recording at the 16th Annual Native American Music Awards, and the piece Beginnings won Best New Age Song. Connor's 2020 release, Scenes from Dinate, features piano pieces written about elements of Navajo life and culture, and it was accompanied by the release of several music videos filmed on the reservation, directed by Navajo filmmaker Michael Etsiti, is that pronounced right? Right. Etsiti Jr. So welcome, Connor. It's a real pleasure to get a chance to talk and about your life, where it began, where you are now, and what you're seeing for the future. So I'm looking forward to finding out more about all of that. So I'd like to start at the beginning, and about your childhood, your first experiences with music, first teachers. How did that begin for you?
It's sort of strange because neither of my parents were musical. I started getting an interest in piano. Part of it was just through listening to some cassette tapes that my mom had. There's the compilation albums of, I think, best of classical music. Yeah. But I was drawn to them. I was, I think, maybe 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And around that time, my dad also got a little tiny keyboard as a gift for Christmas. He didn't play, but I was really fascinated with it. So, I took to it. I started trying to play by ear, and eventually my parents saw that I was interested and got me lessons. So that's kind of where it started. It was sort of out of nowhere.
Yeah. And so your first musical learning really was at the piano.
Yes.
Uh-huh. And did you have like one teacher for a long period of time, or different teachers?
I had several different teachers. It was hard to find a teacher where I was at. I was in Page, Arizona, which is a small town. It was even smaller back when I was growing up. Yeah. There was, I think, like 1 or 2 teachers. And they didn't really even have room. So I had one teacher for a little while. Eventually, my parents were having to drive me to Flagstaff, Arizona, which was a couple hours away, every weekend for a piano lesson. So it was a lot. Yeah. Especially for my parents carting me around just for a piano lesson when I was a kid, and they didn't really know how serious I was about it at the time. So.
And were you improvising at the time and composing from an early age, or were you just sort of going with the curriculum of the teacher?
I started by improvising and playing by ear, things that I heard on the television or the radio, and then making up my own music. I did have a teacher in school that when she saw I was interested, she helped me write a few things down because I had no idea how.
Sure.
And I did that for a while until I want to say I was about maybe 11 or 12 that I sort of backed away from it. I think as I got further in education and I was really focused on piano performance, I had some teachers that were that had said, you don't know enough about composition really. You need all of these other things to be a composer. And so I kind of just gave up on that idea and sort of was like, well, I don't know enough theory. I don't know enough about form and structure, and I just totally focused only on the performance for a long time, actually,
Yeah.
until after, I got my master's degree.
Well, we're lucky that they're telling you that at an early age didn't stop you from that later on.
Yeah.
For a lot of children, that could be the kicker for them to just say, oh, this isn't something that I'm going to do. And then you get preoccupied with other things. So we're lucky, and I know you're blessed to be able to have gone back to that and explored it. I'm curious about, first of all, to win a competition at age 12, you must have excelled very quickly at the piano. Tell me a little bit more about that whole experience.
Well, eventually my parents got me a real piano.
Uh-huh.
There was a piano company, I think, that was based out of Utah, and every so often they'd have a truck of pianos. They'd drive, from Utah down through Arizona
Uh-huh.
to a lot of the small towns, and they came through. And my parents, after I'd been taking lessons for a little while, bought a piano for me. And so when I was 10, after all of this back and forth going to Flagstaff and Page every weekend, my mom's originally from Cincinnati, and they have a performing arts school there that she knew about. So when I was 10, they basically gave me the option to audition and see if I could get in, and if I was accepted, then move to Cincinnati, which is what happened.
Oh,
So,
really? Oh, okay.
My parents made a huge sacrifice for me to be able to
Wow.
continue studying music when I was 10.
And so the whole family moved?
Yeah.
Wow. That is a commitment.
Yes. That was definitely a turning point for me, because that was, even though I was 10, that was a moment when I really had to decide, am I serious about music?
Right.
Because, that was a lot for them to sacrifice just for me to have better music education.
Absolutely. Right. My goodness, yeah. I am curious about your impressions as you were a child with music, because I'm assuming you were raised on one of the regular method series type things, and that your training was in this classical vein and so forth. But earlier in your childhood, I'm wondering, did you have any reaction to material in whatever series it was, that was supposedly Native American music or pieces? Was that something that was jarring in any way to you, or incompatible?
Yeah, I think for so much of my life I had compartmentalized everything, where there was, my piano world, my piano life, and then my home life, or my heritage that I had, I think for a long time sort of taken for granted. It was just, I didn't realize until after I left Arizona that it wasn't the normal culture. And so, I encountered those things, and as a child, I didn't really think as much of it, other than I had no connection to it, and it was just like a cartoonish display that was, really not accurate. And I think it wasn't really until I was a little older that I started to understand the problem with it, because I started to realize that people that were not from an area that was close to a reservation, or didn't encounter any indigenous people, that was their perception, that they thought that we were the cartoon character. And and for me, it was obvious that it was just, totally not accurate. It was just, totally ridiculous. But, as I got older and encountered more people, and as I started teaching and encountered other students, I started to realize that there was this really skewed perception of what it was to be an indigenous person, and that we were still around, and that we still existed, and that we weren't just this, piece in a museum somewhere.
Right. And I've heard you tell the story about some students that you encountered asking you what your heritage was, and if you're okay sharing that again, it's I think a heart-wrenching story, but it has great importance, and So if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no,
sharing
it
that?
was. It was the first lesson that I had taught to a brother and sister, and so it was our first time meeting. And I think it was halfway through the younger brother's lesson that he sort of just stopped the lesson and said, "What are you? What are you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, are you Chinese?" And his sister chimed in like, "No, obviously he's black." And I said, "No, actually, I'm Navajo for the Navajo Nation." And he said, "You mean an Indian?" And I said, "Well, I mean, indigenous, or there's many different ways of saying it." He didn't believe me. He said, "No, that's you're joking because all the Indians are dead." And it kind of caught me off guard for a minute. And
Yeah.
and I was like, "No, that's not true." And he
Yeah.
said, "Well, you came here in a car. Like, do you live in a teepee? Like, you didn't, you drove a car here." And I was like, "Wow." There was really no idea that we were still around and that we drove cars or lived
Right.
in a neighborhood just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Certainly there's a lot of things that are different, especially
Yeah.
if like my dad's family is very traditional, and living on the reservation is very different. But there are plenty of people that are not living on the reservation
Right.
that live just like everyone else, and that was a moment that it really hit me that there was this other perception.
Yeah, and it speaks volumes about how important experiences that are that children have, where they're supposedly exposed to other cultures. What about music in your youth? Because obviously your training, you were doing classical music. Were you still exposed to native music around you as a child? Did you sense were those compartmentalized too?
It was my earliest, influences, other than what my parents would play on the radio, was my grandfather singing traditional songs. Before I could speak, he was singing traditional songs, and I was learning to dance to the traditional music that if he wasn't actually singing it, they did have some recordings that they'd play. And on Navajo Nation radio, like KTNN, they have all of the different traditional songs that they play. And so it was a mixture of things, but I'd never, again, it wasn't one of those things that I thought much about. And I don't think it was until later in life, especially when I started composing and I started having other people pick apart my compositions, that I realized what an impact it had on me. The music that I listened to in my formative years, that even though I didn't think necessarily critically about it or even realize it, the choices and things I was doing through instinct as a composer were influenced by it.
Sure.
And it's interesting to me when people ask me about my music or they dissect it and have questions, because they'll find things that I didn't realize that I was doing that are related, that I just did instinctually. Not that I didn't understand the concept of what was happening, but it wasn't something that I thought I'm reaching into, this part of my musical background for inspiration. It was, it's an interesting thing how that popped up even all of these years later.
It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like though that although your training went on this very traditional Western European canon training, there's was understanding and deep respect though for the native culture music that was a part of your life, but that was in a different place than your
I never
musical
really
path.
imagined it intersecting. I never really, it was just so different that I never even put the two things together. The approach to music and the way that my grandfather sang or treated rhythms and the melodies, it was just so different that it wasn't something I'd thought much about when I was studying, music theory and the Western ideas of music theory.
But yet and you didn't, because I mean, well, speaking for myself, when I got immersed in college and studying music, there's a bit of snobbery that goes along with it, that I'm doing great art music. But it doesn't sound like there was that for you in terms of this music is better than that. It's just that they coexisted, but they were different activities for you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And, so some of the things that I did read from, ethnomusicologists that were very disparaging And I remember coming across those things and thinking, oh, these people just don't get it. It was kind of funny to me, but then, the more I thought about it, the more it wasn't funny. And I
Yeah.
think that's sort of what all of these little things sort of steered me down this path of where I'm at today, because it certainly wasn't intentional, for me to, for one thing, be composing,
Uh-huh.
and to be finding ways to combine my heritage and the classical piano world that I was so deep into, just on the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But all of these little things sort of were, I think, nudging me in this direction.
So in college, your plan was it was performance. What was your
Yes.
goal? And what were, what happened during that time that then not took you away from performance, but you added this whole composition component. How did that come about? Where when you got out and started out this career, composition became such a major force.
I was, during my master's degree, I think during my time in college, it was very tumultuous for me. And I didn't really know why, and I felt sort of without direction, and I was deeply unhappy and trying to kind of figure things out, as many people are around that time.
Right.
And I think the culture that I was like so immersed in, the most toxic part of the classical music culture, I sort of made the decision to just kind of walk away from it and to go back home. And it was something I'd always planned to do, but where I was originally thinking, oh, I'm going to go pursue a DMA, I sort of was, disillusioned it, and I thought, this isn't right. There was just something inside me that said,
Right.
let's just take a break from this all and walk away from it and pursue something that was important to me, and that was to find ways to preserve some of the music that my grandfather sang, because a lot of it gets lost. It's passed down orally,
Right.
and the language is getting lost. And so I wanted to take an opportunity to find a way to do that. So I was thinking of maybe writing these things down in sheet music form, but that just didn't feel right. And I was like, why would I do that? Who would that be for? Like my grandfather.
Right.
All of the traditional singers don't use sheet music, and that's kind of it runs counter to what that part of the culture is about. The sharing things orally and passing things down. And so eventually, what I just started doing was taking some of the songs and just trying to play them on the piano, which was a little challenging because there were things that my grandfather did with his voice that didn't quite work. And so I sort of was pushing things around, and there also wasn't any harmony, so that was something that I started adding, and it was sort of this preservation project that turned into something else. And so where I started with a few things that were more or less just settings of the melodies, as I was sort of fitting those into a piano style and making little changes so it fit, then I started doing other things with these little compositional devices that were inspired by the ways that he would shift meter frequently, or different ways that the themes were developed. And so what started as setting a few melodies actually turned into me starting to compose some original things, and reaching back into that part of me that wanted to compose, since I was a child, and creating what was just, for me, was going to be just an album of these pieces that was kind of just for myself, but I put it out there, and eventually, so people started getting interested in it, and they started asking me for sheet music, and which I didn't have because I did everything in my head. I was so it was sort of one by one. I'd be like, well, which one do you want to play? And they'd tell me, and I'd write it down and send it out. And so little by little, people took this interest in it, and I sort of continued down the path. People were asking me, well, what's next? You did this album. Well, what's next? And that's when I thought, okay, well, I've been inspired by the traditional music, but I was also inspired by our traditional stories, our creation stories, and all of the things that are so interesting about the culture. And so I started looking for ways to take that and embed that in music as well. So it was this strange path that I took that was very roundabout to get where I'm at. But it just sort of had this natural flow, and things started to fall into place, and they felt better because, when I was focusing only on performance, I felt out of place. I felt not necessarily that I belonged, but then as I was working on these projects that were really important to me, I started to find purpose. And so that was sort of like, okay, you found something now. You
Right.
found a little bit of a direction.
Exactly.
And so I,
Right.
still don't know what the next step is often, but I'm sort of guided by that feeling.
I mean, it clearly, just speaking to you, it's clear that you found purpose, you found joy, in what you were doing, and the angst and struggle that you were dealing with earlier, you moved beyond that into something, and that's what makes it something that's right, and it's also something that's real because it's yours.
Yeah.
Which I think we can all learn from. I'm curious in using melodies and rhythms, stories. Anyway, I believe I've heard you mention that there are certain things which are sacred,
Yes.
and so there are some parts that you don't use. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about how that
Sure.
works?
Music is such a big part in Navajo culture. There's songs for, riding your horse or when you're weaving, but there's also ceremonial songs. And so the music sort of permeates all these different spaces. And it's somewhat similar, I think, to secular religious music. But part of the oral tradition is because the Navajo people believe in the power of music. And so these sacred songs that are only for ceremony are just that. They shouldn't be shared outside of that. And even a lot of the people that sing the songs don't practice them until they're in ceremony. You
wow.
practice it in your head until the next opportunity to actually sing it out loud. And there are also songs that are for certain times of the year that you're only supposed to sing, during the winter. And so, I try to be really cognizant of all of those things when I'm including music that I know is going to be streaming or going to be accessible to be played any time of the year or in any space. So those were always considerations I took, and talking to my dad and talking to my grandfather and other relatives. Everybody has a different opinion, but I do my best to find things that are going to be respectful and not overshare things that shouldn't be shared. Outside of the community, and that are okay to be on these platforms that we are in this day of technology, where they're accessible by anyone at any time.
Right. How is your music received by the Dina people? Is it first of all, do they know about it? Do they, and are they excited? Are they? What's the reaction?
Yeah, I mean, it was really great for me when I started playing my compositions for people that came from the community, and it was always surprising to me that they caught on to the little things.
Did they? Yeah.
I had a performance I think last year, and it was in Michigan, but there was a Navajo person in the audience that came up afterwards and was talking about, they enjoyed the music and they could hear the female rain and the male rain, and I was like, wow, it's not something I pointed out, but that's just something that we know about in the culture is different types of rain, and those were things that I tried to express, and I was really excited that wasn't just something that I used to inspire the notes I was putting out. It was something that could actually be received by someone who was familiar with it, and actually get it without being told about it.
Right.
And another thing that was really powerful for me was, also when I was younger, I had a lot of really negative experiences with teachers because I was a native student. And
this was in Arizona?
In Arizona,
yeah.
yeah.
Really?
I think I was like 8. I had a teacher that was really particularly not nice.
Okay.
And there was this idea that you had to be this super disciplined, practicing for 20 out of 24 hours a day, and had told me, that you can do this, for fun, but you're never going to do this professionally, because you're an Indian, and there's, you don't have the discipline. You're an American, and Americans are lazy, so that's one thing. But you're an Indian. There aren't any other Indians that are in music like this. There's no way you can compete with the rest of the world. And that for me, luckily, I didn't take that and just quit altogether. It sort of made me mad, and I had something to prove.
Okay,
I don't know if that was a healthy,
I was wondering about
I don't know if
that.
that was a healthy reaction, but that it did sort of light a fire in me.
Yeah.
And I'd kind of forgotten about that for a long time. But recently I had some other colleagues that were teaching on the reservation, sharing my music with the students, and one of the students was like, "Well, wait, he's Navajo?" And they were like, "Yeah. Oh, so that means I can do this too."
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that was powerful for me, because I had gone this direction and was able to sort of, I don't know, pass this down to someone else and hopefully inspire them, because I think constantly of all the things I didn't do because I felt I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't worthy, or this was, a pursuit that I just couldn't accomplish. So I'm excited to see a new generation that feels like they can do something. Like, what are they going to come up with
Exactly.
when they have the right resources and the right fostering of their creativity and their talents?
Right. Well, and, what that the teacher said, those horrible things. I mean, one thing was true about it is you were like no others, especially when you went on pursuing music further. I mean, how many indigenous pianists like yourself were there?
Yeah.
You didn't see that. And unfortunately, the words of somebody like that take that experience and make it as if it's proof that they're right.
Right.
And it's just you haven't allowed this to happen. And I think, I can say for myself that, someone like you is, as you already know, is having impact on other young potential pianists or musicians, showing them, oh yeah, this can happen. It's so basic about, again, we go back to childhood and perceptions and what children are shown. It can open up worlds of possibility for them.
And I think often of just how fortunate I was that I had parents that were so dedicated to me pursuing the things that I had an interest in, because that was a lot to give up for a 10-year-old.
That's right. That
says he's gonna practice.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, right. But that's a big problem, is the resources aren't there. I mean, a lot of parents, not necessarily that they would have chosen to not get lessons, they just couldn't. I was
Right.
My parents were driving me 2 hours to somewhere else just for a piano lesson once a week. I mean, that's not a reality for a lot of people, even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate in how the stars aligned, and that I had parents that were so supportive. And so that was something that I always think about and want to make sure I try to give back and create other opportunities for students that maybe aren't in the same situation that I was, that had these opportunities, that we have to bring those opportunities to them. It's important.
Yeah. Which brings me to a project which I'm familiar with, that is an exciting one, where with the Francis Clark Center, you're along with Renata Yazzie leading a project of commissioned works by indigenous composers for young piano students, or for elementary students. We've been working on the project together, but one thing we haven't talked about is, what does this project mean to you? What partly, what do you hope to achieve by it, but also on a more personal level, what meaning does that hold for you?
I think it's important on so many levels. I think the first is the level of communication, because music is a great way to communicate and to foster curiosity. That's something that with my music I try to do, and I'm always surprised at the conversations that open up with other cultures, and things that I learn about other people because they found something in the music that relates to Diné culture that also relates to some aspect of their unique background. And those are the conversations that are so important, to really be able to celebrate the diversity and what makes everybody unique and what they can bring to the table. Specifically in the indigenous communities, I think it's important because it shows possibility. They are seeing things that are placed in front of them that they can say, hey, maybe I want to do this someday. Maybe I want to be a composer. Maybe I want to play piano, or, these are things that there's a place for us, you know, and it's important for students to see that there is a
Right.
place for them if they want to pursue music or whatever avenue it is. And that wasn't the case because in the past, you know, the representation was so flawed,
Yeah.
and it wasn't really a representation. It was more of a mockery
Yeah.
that had, you know, a negative
To
impact.
have representation that's not a cartoon,
Right.
something
Right.
that they can actually relate to. And then I'll flip it to the other side. I think it's important for those students who had these misconceptions of Native Americans, for students to have real things presented to them. It makes it so that they're not so ignorant,
Right.
to put it bluntly. Yes. And I do want to mention, too, one of the other fascinating things in your career, this is kind of a shift here, but is some of the multimedia aspects of some of your work, the videos that you did, which incorporated your music and the videos, and those were, I think, shot on the reservation, right?
Yes.
And and I remember that I've seen the one on fry bread where you're watching it made and all of that. I'd love to hear a bit of your thoughts on what you hope to achieve with that, and just the whole multimedia aspect. You know, was that something that was fun? Is that something that you want to continue to do? And
Yeah, I think, you know, I was at first inspired just by the changing nature of how we consume music, and the platforms that it's on. It's not just on the radio, and you're not just putting your headphones on. You're seeing something visually, and that was something I didn't have in my music before, and I was always, you know, very. I avoided being on camera or all those kinds of things, so it was hard for me to do. But
Yeah.
you know, it was like I can either just say no, I'm not going to do it, and you know, be cast aside, or
Right.
you know, move with the way that the culture's moving. And so I did a music video that was very simple, but we shot it out in the reservation where my family's from, which was an interesting experience, having a piano out in the middle,
Yes, that
in the middle
was-
of the desert. But people enjoyed it, and it got me thinking about, you know, I was thinking about my next set of pieces, my next album, and I wanted to show, you know, not just to share the music, but that was an opportunity visually to show people what life was kind of like today.
Yes.
Because again, there was this idea that either we don't exist anymore or we're this piece of history. And it's, you know, it's interesting. I think people are interested to see how we have this really rich heritage that we can also incorporate in the modern world. And so that was something I wanted to do, is show a little bit of, you know, things that I'd seen growing up, but that not everyone else had. And
Right.
parts of the country and where I was originally from, you know, that was a great way to share that. And I was super fortunate that my good friend Michael at City just happened to be, and this was during COVID.
Oh,
So,
really? Oh, wow.
you know, he actually was supposed to be going to the Philippines and ended up being quarantined at my place. And it was just, it was four of us that, you know, we were in the house together, and I was pushing this album back. And then I realized this is, you know, not going to be just a couple weeks. This is going to be something long term. And
Right.
so we actually ended up planning these music videos and shooting it. I think we did it all in like 4 days.
Oh my
a bunch
goodness.
of videos.
Wow.
And it kind of worked out. And he actually was someone that I'd met when I was younger through piano lessons. Like when I first started out, we had piano lessons together when I think it was just for a couple months before
Yeah.
my parents had to start taking me out of town. But, you know, we'd reconnected, and he had a real sense for music, and he had a real sense for visually what I had envisioned when I was composing these pieces, and all those little moments that when you're watching the videos and the music syncs up perfectly with, you know, whatever the activity is or whatever you're seeing on the screen. He just latched onto that
Yeah.
instantly, and so it was really exciting for me to have that process and to have somebody who also was a creative person and
Right.
had sort of their own vision of things that they could add to it. So that's definitely something I want to continue.
Good, because they're beautiful. I love the way they're very poetic and beautiful. Love it. So I know currently, you know, you're busy performing, doing presentations, writing, all that stuff. What what do you see coming next?
Sometimes I get so caught up in the moment, and it's not always a bad thing because
That's true.
you know, because
The moment's
sometimes
important.
I think I spent so much time looking into the future with fear of what's going to happen next that if I'd have kept doing that, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at. So I'm sort of in a different place now where I'm not trying to get too caught up in the future. Obviously, there's things that are important to me,
Sure.
things about my music that are important, but I'm really fortunate right now to have sort of opportunities that can also guide me to where I'm going next, to unexpected places, because I feel, I mean, just a few years ago, if I'd have wanted to be where I'm at today, I would have had no idea how to get here. You know,
Yeah.
there was no clear path. There
Uh-huh.
wasn't one thing that I was going to do to get here.
Uh-huh.
And so that's kind of the exciting part, is I have no idea what I'm going to be doing next. I don't know, a year from now or 2
Well,
years
it's
from
working
now.
just fine for you. That's the thing. And you make a good point there about about worrying too much about where you want to be impeding your work.
I
where
think,
you are
you know,
now.
there was so much structure that's been put in place for musicians, especially in the classical world, where it's
Yeah.
like, this is what you do. And there was a lot of times I didn't even stop to ask myself why. You know, like, why do I want to continue with my DMA? Is that for me? And I realized it wasn't, but I was going to do that just because that's the path you take. That's what you do next. You know,
Exactly.
now I'm going to start
Yeah.
my auditions for the next thing, and then I'm
Yeah.
going to do this. And so, you know, having structure is great, but also I think something that I really embraced was possibility,
Mhm.
and not having to cling to any one thing. And it's a little scary, but also exciting. And so
Yeah.
I'm finding a way to balance that, of having structure and a plan,
Right.
and also being open to change and being open to other things that might take me into a
Right.
totally different direction that maybe I'm not comfortable with at first, but you know,
Right.
it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, and that's a wonderful example, particularly for younger musicians who still are raised with that idea of this is, you know, how you should go about charting your life, to see how there are options beyond that set path.
Yeah, it's
that we've all
important.
been
And, you know,
raised.
I don't want to disparage that, because that is a
No.
really, you know,
Oh.
admirable path that
Right.
works very well for many people, but it didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And I just never taken a moment to realize that that's okay.
Yeah,
that I
that's
could
right.
do something else.
Yeah.
So
And the other, sort of circling back, the other beautiful thing about your path that you've been on is that you were able to circle back and incorporate part of your heritage, and in that way find joy and more wholeness, really, in your work. So we end all of these with one question here. And that question is, how does piano inspire you?
I think, you know, the more that I've spent time at the piano, the more that I'm constantly amazed by possibility.
Hmm.
Because sometimes, especially when I'm composing, I'm sitting there, you know, looking for inspiration,
Mhm.
and it's incredible to me that this one instrument for so long, you know, we're still coming up with new things, still coming up with
Mhm.
new ideas, new music, and also watching other people sit at the instrument. And it's incredible how the same instrument that I might sit at and do something,
Mhm.
you know, it becomes a part of someone else, and I can be really mesmerized by the things that
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could play this way. You know, it's exciting, and it's pretty incredible. So for me, you know, it inspires possibility.
Uh-huh.
It seems at first glance maybe it's limiting, because there's only so many keys. There's only
Right.
you know, so many. Well, it's really not true. It's kind of limitless. So it's an interesting
Yeah.
balance between having the constraints of what you can do at the piano, but also the fact that we're still coming up with new things after all this
Right.
time. And I'm still amazed when I see someone else who does a different type of music or different style
Mhm.
or a different technique or
Mhm.
comes from a different place. That possibility is what really inspires me to continue.
Yeah. Well, and your life to this point demonstrates that. You know how piano can do that, and how we hope it will do that for so many people. So I want to thank you, Connor, for this time with us to talk and share so much, and more importantly, thank you for all that you're doing currently and in the future. It's beautiful music. If anybody listening has never listened to your music, they need to, or go to YouTube and the videos are there. But it's just wonderful contributions to the art, but also to the education of young musicians. And there's many great things yet to come out of it. And it's wonderful to have you be a part of that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I have to say, thank you for everyone that's involved in all the many things at the Francis Clark Center. But it's so great to have a place that feels like I belong, and that there are things, that there's so many important things that are possible in the right environment, and this the culture of this whole everything that's going on is so positive, and so I really appreciate that and the opportunity to speak.
And we are thrilled to be a place for you to be and to grow. So thank you so much.
The Francis Clark Center is a not-for-profit educational organization that serves the advancement of piano teaching, learning, and performing. Divisions include Piano Magazine, PianoInspires Kids, Journal for Piano Research, National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy, the New School for Music Study, Piano Education Press, International Online Teacher Education, and PianoInspires Online Community Hub. Please visit us at PianoInspires.com to learn more about our impactful work and inspiring community.